Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Karak with Mehreen show. I'm very, very excited about today's guest. She is the host of an amazing podcast called What's Brown Got to Do with It, where she shares inspiring South Asian stories. She tackled South Asian social issues and social norms. She shares the beauties of our cultures. She is a phenomenal woman who has also founded a one of its kind initiative that is a South Asian community for inclusion, representation, and diversity. She is truly a South Asian superwoman. Let me please welcome Shadia Siddiqui.
Hi. Oh my God. Can you record that for me and send that in a voice note?
You can replay it every time you wake up.
I'm just like,
that'll be your
biggest...
motivation for the morning.
Every morning. I love it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Just want to say, your show is just amazing. And, we were just talking about this, how I find it so real. You have such great, guests on there. You talk about real topics that is really inspiring. So back at you.
Thank you. But honestly, when I started listening to your episodes, I enjoyed them so much, and every time I would go back, so I would listen to them while I was driving. Every time I would go back to the car, I immediately wanted to continue. I had that craving to continue because it's so interesting. It was very, you were talking about realism, and I felt a lot of the stories that you shared were very real, especially when the episode with your sister, I loved it. So love your episodes, love your podcast. It's so cool what you're doing. So I'm very, very honored that you're here. I'm so
honored
excited
that you invited me. So.
Thank you for being here. We're going to be talking about a lot of things. I'm very excited. We'll start off by talking a little bit about you growing up in the UK and how that experience was like. Whether you felt like you were able to fit in or not in the community. I'm very intrigued to know how South Asians growing up in a community with more white people or people that don't look like them, how they adjust, I guess. So we can start off with that.
Sure.
Yeah,
my story is a little bit unique in the sense that so my dad's from India, my mom's from Pakistan. So, culturally, I have this big mix anyway. And then throw that into, to give you a bit of history, when people migrated to the UK, what they did, they lived in pockets of familiarity. So, Pakistanis, they all moved to one community, Indians moved to one community, and that still exists to this day. And not even the South Asians, but even Turkish Cypriots live in a certain place, Jews live in a certain place. And so, when you go to London specifically, you'll find that, North London, South London, East and West, you'll find those pockets of community.
So the segregation is very clear. It's explicit.
Yeah. And it's always been that way. And then I lived in an area which is predominantly a white area. And I think I mentioned this in my podcast as well, that I went to a Catholic school. But, there was an Indian community there. There's a Pakistani community there. And I just didn't fit into either because the Pakistanis never saw me as Pakistani enough. And the Indians probably saw me as Pakistani. So it became a bit complicated, and it was silly things because I would wear a skirt and not trousers. Whereas the Pakistani community where I live, they were really strict. Oh my God. I tell you, I used to see girls leave their house and on the way to school, or they get to school and go into the washrooms and then put makeup on and, put their hair out and stuff. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is a different person.
Yeah.
And I just found that so intriguing because I never had to do that. And so I didn't quite fit in that because the values were, or the culture was a little bit kind of different. And so, I had a huge mix of friends. So my close friend circle, my best friends, I had 2 English girls, 2 black girls, and 2 Indian girls, and me. So it was a nice, little mix.
So there was no Pakistanis in the group.
No, I was the Pakistani representative. Yeah. But no, there were 2 Indian girls, and and one of them is still my best friend, to this day. And so growing up, it was just never fitting in anywhere. And then plus, we lived in a very racist, era. Growing up for me, there was a lot of racism. And so there was a huge segregation between whites and South Asians. like from the offset, right from the beginning. And so you were always, always felt different anyway. And then throw in my own background, it was just a recipe for disaster.
How do you think that feeling different in those scenarios impacted you? Do you feel like you wanted to run away from your culture, or you wanted to go into your culture more?
Interesting. No, I tell you one thing. I've always loved my culture. I love and I have always embraced it. But I am able to assimilate into any like part of the world, any environment. I can be as English as you need me to be. I can be as Desi as you need me to be. And it's just insane how I'm so comfortable like changing and assimilating into different spaces. But I think the impact in the long term for me is it made me resilient. Because racism didn't just come from school. I think I probably felt more racism or feeling more different when I started my career.
Because, interesting.
Yeah.
More than school, more than school. Where you grew up.
I feel like when you're at school, you kind of expect it, or like they're kids and you don't know, you just kind of rise to it. And I was very, what's the word? I can give as good as I get. Right. So, but I actually feel that trait in me has been because of all the racism that I have
built
encountered.
you in that way.
Now, I mean, back in those days, there was no word for it. It was just racism. Now it's microaggressions, macroaggressions. There's so many different terminology that we can use. But back then it wasn't. It was just racist.
Yeah.
And, being called like you'd walk down the street and, Paki, like it's a very, now what's really interesting is a lot of like my North American friends or even my Arab friends, when they'll say Paki and they're short for Pakistani to them. I'm like, no, like it's a very racist term in the UK and it's really offensive. But that was quite normal. You'd hear, even not to me, but, you'd hear people calling other people and you see like that conflict.
Like, even on the streets, you'd...
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. yeah. Like that was just easy. You just walk past.
You're like, yeah, that's not... Yeah, that's
just normal.
That was the everyday.
Yeah, so, hey, Paki, all right? And you're like, hey, how's it going?
So it's interesting because you were saying that was something that's obviously something wrong. It's offensive, but then you kind of got used to it. Yeah. And does that mean you, like, did it become less offensive? Like when your friends would say it, did you still feel offended? Like, how would you respond then? Did you just stop responding afterwards? Like, how was the experience with these type of, like, these are microaggressions, these type of microaggressions?
I mean, you also have to remember, like, I grew up in a time as well where there was no education around diversity, you know? So people didn't necessarily know. There was no social media then. So, you don't know that this is wrong. You're like, oh, okay, but not so much me, and I have to admit that because I can give as good as I get, and plus I had such a mixed like circle. People at school, it wasn't so bad for me, but I did see it like with my peers and stuff. I did see it with other people, and so what ends up happening is that you either conform to, or you try and adapt to, I'm actually not, I'm going to try and be as English as I possibly can be and pretend that, none of my cultural identity exists. Or I'm just going to be the complete opposite way and I'm going to really embrace like being like Desi and that's it. So it was one way or the other. So you'll see like one or two Desis like hanging out with all the white kids and stuff, and you think, oh, you're really trying hard there. But you can see that they don't actually fit in. Like they're actually questioning or they feel lost themselves.
It's like they're trying to change their identity in a way or eliminate that part of their identity. But I mean, you can never do that. That's a part of you. And I think it was interesting when you were mentioning that when you saw, Pakistanis, they came from very strict households. So, and then when they came in, they would remove their scarves, I guess, or put on makeup and things like that. And I saw that as well growing up.
Oh, wow.
And it was very common for me to see. And because of that, I feel sad saying this, but I would feel ashamed of my culture because I saw it so much that I was like, oh, most of Pakistanis are just like that. So I don't want to connect with Pakistan culture. Yeah. That's why I was asking you, would you run away or would you embraced your culture, like how would you respond to that situation? I feel like for you, maybe it's because of your parents, maybe I don't know how you,
Yeah.
I guess because of your diverse circles, you were just able to balance the both.
Yeah.
I guess.
I
Yeah.
think that's what it is. And I think my parents were a bit more open-minded, and maybe because of their own cultural like differences as well. So, and my dad, I think my dad was a big influence, and he's very open-minded, and, he's very, I mean, I feel like he actually tried to assimilate into the English culture after he migrated. So I find that really interesting. Like, we had to look a certain way. We had to, we always had to look presentable. I just remember this. Everything about my dad has to be presentable. Even if you're setting the dinner table for dinner and it's just the four of us, it has to be presentable. And so I think that kind of stayed with me, because I had to always look a certain way. And as I mentioned, when I growing up, that became more and more apparent in me. So I feel like I didn't actually feel anything, because when we were kids, it's different. You're just going along with it. You're learning life, and you just think it's normal because you don't know otherwise. Like I said, no social media, no education,
No awareness.
it's the norm.
Yeah.
But it did make me sad, and I used to make me laugh, like when I see the kids sneaking around, and they weren't allowed out, they weren't allowed to go out after like school or anything, and they only had like their friends, like the Pakistanis only had Pakistani friends. And I just found that so wild,
Yeah.
like I'm Muslim, but I spent enough time in the Gurdwara and the Mandir as well, because my friends, like were there and stuff, and I used to go with them. In the long run, it actually prepares you, and it makes you so much more open to diversity and culture and acceptance of, and tolerance. Like, we're in the UAE, everything's about tolerance, and that all led me to be able to fit in and say, yeah, okay, I'm there now.
And it just makes you more knowledgeable about other people. Like, you're better aware of how to communicate with other people. You're better aware of how to act in certain situations. It just helps you in so many ways. Like, I remember reading about third culture kids, and how third culture kids are, a lot of people say, can be better leaders, have the potential to be better leaders, because they can understand, they're very open-minded, and they can understand people of different cultures, because they come from that kind of mixed background.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's so true. And you can see that how that's impacted you your entire life. And going back to something you said, you were talking about your father, and how when he came to the UK, he had this desire to always be presentable, to teach my kids always to be presentable. Why do you think that was?
Because he moved at a time where racism was at its rife, right? And so you have to stand out. Otherwise, if you don't seem to be different to everybody else, then you're just going to get lost in society. And I think he just never wanted that for us. He wanted us to study. He wanted us to be educated and have good jobs. And it's just my sister and I. And he always taught us, like, to be independent and rely on nobody. But I think some of his experiences, which he never spoke about, but now I understand it better, I think, okay, he just didn't want us to have those same experiences. I think he thought, if you look good, you present yourself well, then, that's the difference between me and maybe my shalwar kameez wearing, peer who I went to school with. And if we both went for a job, then just by looking at us, and predominantly is most likely going to be that, the hiring person is going to be a non-South Asian or a non-colored person. And so they'll see the difference, and they'll alter the stereotype. They'll be like, oh, that's the stereotype. Wearing shalwar kameez, like, no, they're not going to fit here. Okay, this girl looks the part, so let's have her.
That's very interesting, because I think there are different ways in which you could tackle stereotypes. And a lot of people talk about tackling stereotypes by embracing them, like embracing the fact that she wears the shalwar kameez and telling people to accept it, or not conforming to that stereotype and doing something else. You know what I mean? So how do you think that the second thing is what your father was trying to do? He was trying to break the stereotype of how South Asians only wear this type of clothing, or it's not even about clothing. It's just that we're seeing that clothing probably associates you with all those other things that South Asians are stereotyped to be in the UK.
I mean, the stereotype was, right, that, put like tail oil in your hair and, you're wearing shalwar kameez and you're like nodding your head and you can't speak English. Like, it's just the most ridiculous like thing. But there were a lot of people that were doing that. So the stereotype comes from somewhere.
So you think it was true at some point?
I mean, it was, but that's our culture, that's and people, the other interesting thing that I find about people that migrated, like say, for example, to the UK, is that they left their homes, so in India, Pakistan, whatever, they moved there. So they took with them their cultural values and, things that they only knew. And then they tried to use that in like a Western country. And so for us growing up, it's like, okay, our parents are coming in with these values. That's all they know. But little did they know that India and Pakistan, they were progressing with time. But because they only knew that and they didn't see the progression, they're still stuck in like this time warp, right? And so what they were doing is that they're not progressing with time. And so that, and I often find this, like a lot of like my friends and, family from Pakistan, like they're so modern, and you would go home, you'd go to like India or Pakistan and you think, I felt like a villager or something, because they look at you like, they're doing all these like crazy things and like we wouldn't think of. And you'll always find with British Desis that they're a very certain type of
Desi?
Yeah, and they're very rigid, and because they don't know any different. And, a lot of them haven't left the UK. And I always say this, like, they don't go to other countries and travel and stuff. So you just don't have that education of like, there's a whole world outside. And so for some people, it's still really like, that's too modern, if you're wearing, English clothes or whatever, showing your hair and stuff, it's still too modern for them, taking away the religious aspect.
That's very interesting because, so just to reiterate what you were saying that immigrants who move to other countries coming from South Asia, they take their culture with them, and their home countries are evolving, but they don't see that evolution. So their culture, their values are not evolving with those countries as well.
Yeah.
So that's why they are more rigid, they're more strict with their culture.
Yeah, and coupled with like, you want to hold on to what you know, right? Like that's a piece of you that you miss from home, and that's what you know. So you don't want to lose your sense of identity. And for a lot of them, that was their identity, and they didn't know any different. And then what happened, so for me growing up, a lot of the times, or my friends, I definitely saw that, is that they didn't, like their parents, because they're still stuck in this era that has evolved and they're not aware of, they want to put that on their kids. But your kids are growing up in a Western world as well. So for a lot of the times when I'm talking about the, kids that I grew up with that, were really had really strict parents, they would go to, for example, university and go wild. They would just go wild. It's like freedom all of a sudden. And they don't know what to do with it. So they are, going out all the time, and then they've started drinking, and they've started like doing all like sorts of crazy stuff. Because if you repress somebody for too long and they see like their friends and everyone else doing it, they're going to want to explore.
Exactly.
They're going to want to see what's out there.
Exactly.
Tell me you can't do something was never tell me I can't do something.
Yeah, that's just human nature. Like I've talked about this a lot, that the more restrictions you put on someone, the more they're gonna rebel. Even when they get the slightest opportunity, the smallest of chance, they're gonna rebel. And it's gonna be like, and it's not just a little bit of against what your parents are saying. It's gonna go to the extreme. And I've seen that a lot in growing up, and when I did programs abroad as well, I see that a lot of South Asians that came in there, they are just like, I saw so many people have their first cup of alcohol for the very first time, just because that was the environment they're in. I'm sure that was peer pressure. You could tell.
Yeah.
So it's so true that these type of restrictions do the opposite of what it's intended to do.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I can say about my parents, I'm very blessed that I also have parents who taught me, who showed me everything and just taught me, like, you make your decision, but they would guide me. They wouldn't restrict me. They would guide me, if that makes sense.
But you grew up here as well, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So I think there's an element of safety, right?
Okay.
So do you ever feel that because, this a relatively safe place to grow up, that there was, because in the UK, it was always, safety was always an issue, that, don't go out at night because of safety. And then obviously all the racism and all those things. And then parents did worry that their kids are going to go off the rails and, go crazy and like, "Goro ko dekho, ye log kya kar rahe hain? Don't do that. You can't do that." And it's like, well, actually, you have to trust me enough. I remember once I wanted to go somewhere. My mum said no. I think it was like Garba or something, like with my friends. My mum said no. And my dad said, go, and he said to my mom that if we stop her now, she's always going to be curious. And then she's going to want to do that.
Yeah.
And she'll find a way.
Hide it.
Yeah, she'll find a way. So go. She probably might not even like it, and never want to go again.
Yeah.
But I appreciated that.
Yeah.
Because it did. I went
That's
there
very
and I was
mature,
like,
yeah.
This is a bit cray for me, but I can't keep up. And so, yeah, it was.
So he was right.
Yeah, it satiated like my thirst for knowing what's going on.
What it is, yeah.
Yeah. But when I got to university, I'm like, I'm kind of over this.
Yeah, exactly. I think that comes a lot with trust, like building that trust with your parent. It takes time, and it's hard for parents, I feel like, just because obviously they're your children, so you have to trust them, but you're also extremely concerned and worried.
Yeah.
So I feel like for parents, that's quite difficult. Maybe you've experienced that with your son.
I do. Like, did you ever... My dad used to say to me, agar tum ladka hoti. So basically, if I was a boy, it'd be different. And I used to get so wound up.
That's so annoying.
Like, why? There's no difference between me and a boy. And on one hand, you're teaching me to be independent, and you're telling me that you're my daughters, you're my sons, and stand on your own 2 feet. But on the other hand, like, you say these things. And actually, it's not until you have your own child that you realize that, okay, I do see, especially in our culture, that there are, what they do kind of mean in terms of like safety. And
so when you would say that if you were a boy, what scenarios would that be in?
I don't know, like if I want to go somewhere particular,
Okay, so it was usually going outside.
Yeah, if I want to come back late. That no, if you were a boy, agar tum ladka hoti and stuff. Like, why? Why can't I come back? Why is it okay if I was a boy to come back that late and stuff?
So for them, it was mostly about safety.
Yeah, I think so. And listen, I was no easy child either. If my family listening to this, my dad listening to this, and we're like, I think you're leaving some stuff out. I was no easy child. I was always social, and I always wanted to go out. So there had to be points where they have to put their foot down.
The limits, yeah.
But, overall, I think I had it a lot. I had it easy in a lot of ways, but it was difficult too. Because having like open-minded parents and living in a society where everyone else was so closed-minded, it singled you out. And that's, I think, what happened. So like especially like the Pakistani community, I was like an outcast.
Wow. Did you feel more of an outcast in the Pakistani community versus the Indian community?
Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
Definitely. Because in the Indian community, it was the norm, right?
Yeah.
It's normal.
The clothes,
going out, doing all these things and stuff. It was very normal. So I was able to fit right in. But the Pakistani, they weren't even allowed out after 5 o'clock.
But it's interesting because even I know in Indian community, the clothing, these things do differ, but curfews, these sort of things, I would think that it's the same.
Yeah, it was the same.
Okay.
But they just had a different approach to it.
Got it. Like the mindset also is different.
More flexible.
Perhaps.
maybe, you know, okay, if you're going in a group of friends and stuff, where are you going, who are you going with, phone in. Like with my Pakistani friends, it was like, no, it was just a no. There's just no, you know, this is not up for debate or conversation. It's just no.
Do you think Pakistanis are still the same way?
No. I mean, everyone's changed. And I think there's been a lot of changes and evolvement. You know, people now, there's a next generation, right? So that generation of the immigrants who went across and holding on to their values, that's like changed. And then there was the next generation, and now they've had their kids and they realize that, okay, these are all the things that were wrong. And I'm not going to be like that with my kids. And so it's changed. There's a lot more flexibility. There's a lot of more open-mindedness, and there's a lot more education because everyone has education, you know, on their fingertips now. So I think that mindset has changed. But interestingly enough, like now, the next generation after that, like say, for example, my son, like his identity that he, you know, kind of that resonates with him is going to be completely different. And I think somebody I was talking to yesterday, they were saying that, like, we're lucky, you know, we're like these sandwich children. We get the best of both worlds and we understand. So, you know, we can be more empathetic. We can be more understanding in a lot of like situations. We're better leaders. But, you know, the next generation, they haven't experienced any of that. And especially growing up here.
Wow. Interesting. So, wait, just to recap what you were saying, that the next generation, especially people who grew up here, haven't experienced what exactly that they lack?
They haven't experienced the traumas in the same way. I know growing up here, it's slightly different.
Yeah, it is.
Because there are a lot of like things that do go on, and I know like a lot of my friends that were born and raised here, and my South Asian friends, and a lot of what they've gone through, the macro, the micros, you know, the actual racism, which hasn't been easy, and it makes you a certain way. But like my son growing up here, he goes to a British school. He has South Asian friends. He has a mixed set of friends. He's very much like me. But I don't think he's ever experienced or understood the actual racism that maybe you would have growing up here.
Interesting.
That generation is now different and they're taught differently.
So we're seeing an improvement.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a long way to go.
For sure.
There's still a hell of a long way to go.
For sure. Yeah. I think when we were talking about how people growing up, you asked me that maybe it was different for me growing up here, and like for example when we talk about safety, and I think, I mean, it's so safe here. I don't live with my parents right now. They live 2 hours away in a different city. The only reason I got this opportunity to live 2 hours away from my family, just 2 hours, was because it's so safe. Like if that wasn't the case, I know my parents are very open-minded. Like they've always wanted me to study abroad, to work abroad, to do things abroad. But I have this advantage where I live in such a safe country that led them to being open-minded, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Because that makes sense. That exactly to my point. Yeah. That you will have a certain level of freedom that maybe kids in the UK growing up didn't have because of the safety aspect.
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, of course, the country that you live in plays a huge role in the way your parents act. But I still think that the level of freedom may vary, but this concept of a girl coming back home on time is cultural, regardless of safety.
It is never going to change. Listen, when I go home, you know, if I'm out at 9 o'clock, my mum will phone me. Go.
Even now?
Yeah. What time are you? I'm like, mother, are you serious? I like live on my own. Yeah. I travel the world. Yeah. I say to them, I don't know how I, travel the world without you guys. I have my own child. Even I don't call him.
You have your own child. Oh my God.
Even I don't, if 9 o'clock he's not home, even I don't call him and say, where are you? But it's a habit. That generation, they worried and they worry, and I'll miss that when nobody's there to worry about me. So I let it go, but it still drives me mad.
Yeah. So was this annoying for you growing up?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I'm like, I'm out with my friends and you just keep calling and I'll come. The worst thing is that they wouldn't sleep. My mum wouldn't sleep until I got home.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you did get home, she's in such a foul mood.
And you also feel bad because like she didn't sleep.
And I'm like, but I told you, why did you stay up? I told you what time I was coming home. It's your choice.
Yeah, this is very cultural, I feel like. But as you said, I think as the generations evolve, these things evolve as well, which we're seeing. One other thing that during this entire conversation reminds me about our culture is this concept of one is gossiping and one is judgment. So there's two sides of this. One is judgment, which is that, like, for example, we're talking about the Pakistani community. They wouldn't accept you just because you're different from them. So because you didn't follow traditions completely, they would reject you or they would judge you.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about this judgment existing in South Asian communities?
I mean, it still exists, right? Like we judge everybody. It's human nature. Somebody walks into the room and within 3 minutes, you've made 3 seconds, you've made a judgment on them based on just how they look, and like to my dad's point of always look presentable so that you stand out from everybody else.
True.
But yeah, growing up, obviously the Pakistani community, their judgment, because I think it's more fear than judgment.
Interesting.
So they fear that, that, like, for example, if my daughter starts hanging out with her, then she's going to start wanting to wear skirts and wanting to do this and wanting to go out. And it's not that they necessarily think there's something wrong with it. It's just that they don't know it. So it's the fear of the unknown and they're not used to it. So they don't want to deal with that. And so it's like, no. She wears a skirt, you can't go out with her because it's their own fear and stuff. But now, I mean, if we talk about like living here, the judgments on socioeconomic background, it's so prevalent in our culture, in the South Asian community here. And it just sometimes baffles me, like you walk into a room and somebody will be like, oh, are you wearing that designer? And I'm still like, wow, you actually went up your way to come to me to kind of like, I don't know, in your head it's a compliment, but for me it's just so, there's so much more to me, right? There's so much more depth to me than how I look or how I speak. And people like,
or the brand that you're wearing.
The brand, I don't know why, like it's such a big deal.
Yeah, this obsession with brands. I feel like I talk a lot about materialism and unfortunately I still see it a lot in the South Asian community. And you were talking about the South Asian community here, but I feel like it's even in India, Pakistan, back home as well.
There's been instances in Pakistan when people have literally, like, oh, where did you buy that from? And how much did you spend? And it's like, okay, I spent 10 lakhs on it. Then it's like, okay, I need to buy something for 15 lakhs. It's like the most ridiculous. And especially in a time where so much is happening in the world, like there's so much poverty, there's so much going on. And, people are still so, it baffles me. Like the humanity, like where's the humanity in our people? Yeah. I'm not saying everyone's like that because, people, I think we're the first to also rise up and say that, to help others. But there's also this unconscious bias towards South Asians, right? Which is the unconscious bias is that South Asians will never rock the boat. They will always conform. Like you can always rely on them. So we as South Asians will never have like a Black Lives Matter movement, right? We will never have that. And a lot of that is because of the prejudices and the judgments that we have of each other.
Wow.
And there's so much history behind that. Like, not only socioeconomic background, but where are you from? As in like, okay, which town or city are you from? Everyone wants to know. So if I'm from Pakistan, like where in Pakistan are you from? There's like so much judgment coming from like, where exactly do you live? Even here, where do you live? Yeah. If you don't live in, I don't know, if you don't live like Jumeirah or Palm, then, are you even worth like
you're not worth talking to.
Yeah. There's so much unpacking to do in our culture. And so I also lead this South Asian affinity group. And one of the things that I wanted to do with the group with Sacred was to bring communities together. So not have this segregation of Indians and Pakistanis and Sri Lankans and Bangladeshis, like actually bring communities together, because our people do such amazing work. There's so much out there, but how many people know about, like, you know, other than the celebrities that you see every day, like people don't know.
Yeah.
But I find the biggest challenge is our people against each other.
Yeah.
And it's so prevalent even now that I don't even know how to tackle it.
Wow, that is crazy. I never saw it. Like when you just said that South Asians would never have a Black Lives Matter kind of movement, I was just shocked, because it made me realize that there's
true,
so much divisions within our community. How could we unite and stand for such a big movement where when you see Black people, they're all come from different places, but they're all very much aligned in some ways.
I mean, there's a lot of like history, you know, and this exists everywhere. You know, this,
For sure.
this divisiveness is everywhere. In every culture. You'll find that Arabs and in the Black community, in the South Asians. But with the Black community, I always find that there's unity in what's the word? There's unity in their oppression, or unity in their grief, and there's unity in the way that they're treated.
Yeah.
So they're very much aligned.
Makes sense.
On that. We're not.
So do you think that that's because, going to your point, when you talk about oppression, do you think that's because of the socioeconomic backgrounds, that because a lot of South Asians come from so many different backgrounds, they don't understand the stereotypes or the challenges that other South Asians face? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think they do. I think people are just choose to be ignorant and ignore it and stuff. And again, like, I'll give an example for the UK government. So you've got Rishi Sunak and, you know, Priti Patel and like all the South Asians that were representing us on, you know, very high level positions. But you see that, what are they doing for their own people? Like, they're anti-immigration, they're anti all of this. And they've tried to assimilate so much into being approving to the non-colored people that actually I'm more like you than I am of them, that they go against their own people, right? And I find that actually, so there's this IDI, it's called the Intercultural Development Inventory.
Okay.
And I'm a qualified assessor on that. So there's a spectrum, and there are 5 points on this spectrum. So you do these questionnaires, these tests, and it tells you like where you are. So it starts with, I forgot what it starts with, and there's minimization, there's polarization. Now, polarization is when you are either overly critical of your own culture and underly critical of another, or vice versa, or the reverse of that, right?
Okay.
So I find that South Asians fit in that so well, because they're either overly critical of being South Asian and our culture, and they assimilate to, you know, the likes of Rishi Sunak, or they're underly, or, you know, everyone else's culture is like the worst thing, i.e. the Pakistanis I grew up with.
Wow, that's actually very interesting, because I feel like I've seen a lot of these little instances of like South Asians judging other South Asians. Like, gossip culture is such a big thing.
Oh God,
we were talking about materialism. I see that so much. And I mean, I've seen Pakistanis judging other cultures as well for wearing this type of clothing, this type of attire. But I've never like joined the dots together to understand that maybe there's a lot of divisiveness, or that there's polarization. And
also sorry to cut you off, but the log kya kahenge culture, right? Like, what will people say? That still exists so much.
It's still very much prevalent. And when we were talking about the cultural aspect of safety, not safety of a girl coming back home on time, I've had this conversation with my parents where I'm like, I don't understand why now they're like chill, but when we would have these conversations about me coming home on time, I'd be like, we live in the safest country in the world. Like, I don't understand this logic. And then I started understanding that their perspective was, what if other people saw you being outside so late at night and it looks really bad? I'm like, as long as you know what I'm doing, why do I care? Why would I care about someone else? Like, it literally doesn't make sense.
And I think I felt like this after my divorce. When I got divorced, then that was, I mean, nobody gets married to get divorced, right?
Of course.
And I was living out here and going through all my things. And, you know, there was a part of me that probably kept up with the pretense of being in this happy marriage for society. And I just find that if someone that's like someone like me, who's quite opinionated and strong and, you know, all those like things that go against what we're raised to be, if I still think that way, then what about those people actually raised that way?
Wow.
And how do you undo all of that learning? Like you don't. And so I remember after my divorce, I had a family wedding, my first family wedding, my cousin's wedding. And I was dreading it. I was actually dreading going home and seeing everybody and, you know, saying like, hey, this is like me divorced. But to my surprise, like everyone was so amazing and supportive and great, you know, nobody like said anything.
Wow, really?
Yeah. And I mean, but again, my family's a little bit different as well. My parents were always like, if you're unhappy, then, you know, walk away.
So they were
supportive,
understanding and supportive.
For years, they were like, do it, just do it. It was me. It was still me thinking, no, but, you know, what will people say?
Wow. So for years, you were talking about this with your family.
Yeah.
And they encouraged.
Yeah. And they were always encouraging. Wow. But it's always like, it's a big deal. You feel like it is a big deal. And it's not easy. And even after, like, after being divorced, there are still times when I'm in situations here, in gatherings or whatever, and you feel like, oh my God, you know, everyone's looking at you as that divorced person and now I'm going to be after your husband and oh my God, like all these things, you know, you feel it, you see it, and so you're back to not fitting in again.
Wow.
And so I've just done like this whole, you know, circle where I start off of like not fitting in, I find myself in life, and then I'm back to not fitting in again. And that's because I'm divorced in an Asian society.
Do you think that South Asians make it harder for you to not fit in?
Yeah, again, the judgments.
But when you were talking about your family, what about your cousins, your uncle, like your extended family?
Oh, no, they're absolutely fine.
Okay, yeah. So it was more of like the other people society, that you would meet. Okay. So, I mean, you were saying that you did a full circle, and I feel like you've always just been this unique person that stands, like, that's just how I see it. Because like that always stands out, because you were saying that when you grew up, you were always this different family and you always stood out from the other communities. You didn't get along with this, but you got along with everyone still because you made diverse groups of people. So I think that's just how I see it, even just talking to you, that you've always, like, even the opinions that you share, it's very distinct. It just resonates with you as a person that makes you stand out, if that makes sense. So I think that everyone has their own journey, you know, and taking the courage to take that step obviously is very difficult. And you were saying that you had this pressure of the societal pressure, but you still did it. And I'm sure you're in a much happier and better situation.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Like my only regret is, you know, why didn't I do it
earlier?
Sooner? Yeah. And that's always the regret. But this is one of the reasons, like, I started the What's Brown Got to Do with It, because one of the things that, you know, it's things that people don't talk about.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I'm very privileged to have, you know, been in the presence of all different people, all walks of life. You know, I've traveled the world, I've lived everywhere. There's a lot, you know, I have educated myself on, and it just saddens me that people are still feeling a certain way, or they still behave a certain way in this day and age. So, you know, life, the world has progressed, everyone's evolved, but the thinking is still, you know, that colonized thinking, that whole like, oh, I shouldn't say anything and I'll just let people exploit me. I'll just let people be this way with me. Like, no, you actually can stand up for yourself. You should stand up for yourself. We stand up for what's right and wrong. And it's also understanding. So one of my biggest takeaways from my own upbringing or my life so far is that I now understand people a lot better because I place them in situations. So I think back to, for example, if I have a boss or somebody, who's quite old and a certain way, I'll think back to, okay, but this person grew up in an era where they didn't have the privilege or understand they worked only with men, right? And so they had to be tough and they had to be this way. And so this way that they are, it's because of their upbringing or the times they were raised in. And I think that people should learn to understand situations a bit more to understand the person. Because you can't do it without.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think that's a skill. Like, not everyone is able to do that. So to be able to do that. And also one thing, going back to what you said about it's very important to stand up for yourself, that you should not just let anyone exploit you. One reason why there's probably a lot of judgment or criticism when someone stands up for themselves is because I think our community is just not used to that. Yeah. They don't see people doing that very often. So when someone does that, it's like, whoa, like that's wrong. Or like, how can a woman have this, like, where did she get this ability to speak from? Like, why is she talking back? You know what I mean?
Financial freedom. That's what's evolved as well for women. When we talk about why they're standing up for themselves, because of financial freedom.
True.
Women are working, they're earning, they're making good money, they're going out, they're doing all the things for themselves. And so they feel that they are able to speak and they have the right to speak. But, there was a time in the generation when a lot of the women didn't work and they didn't. And so, they felt like they don't have the right.
They don't have
the right to speak.
Choice. Yeah. Do you think that every South Asian woman should be financially independent? Would you
100%. I think everybody should be financially independent, and for women especially. One thing I learned through my divorce is that, if I depended on my ex-husband financially, then I would, I don't know how I would have survived now.
Yeah.
But one thing, when my dad taught me to stand on my own 2 feet, that helped me in life, because you don't know what's going to happen in life. Like I said, I didn't get married to get divorced, right? So I didn't know that at this point I'm going to get divorced and I have to do everything myself. But, for the longest time I was doing it anyway. So it's it gives you that kind of, not superpower, but it gives you a little bit more confidence.
Yeah, for sure.
That, okay, I'll be okay.
Yeah.
If I can survive financially, I'll be okay.
And the decisions you make don't end up being dependent on someone else. Those decisions are coming from a place, like coming from yourself, not because of this or because of that. It's because you want that. Exactly. You know what I mean? So it's more of a personal decision than something that's dependent on someone else.
I know people in situations that they're so unhappy in, but because they're not financially independent, they feel trapped. But where will I go? What will I do?
Yeah, exactly. Like I mean, same. Like I've seen so many women who stay in relationships where the men have cheated on them, but they still stay because they're scared to leave, since they don't. That's their only financial source of income. So it's very sad to see that. But I also get confused sometimes because I know there's a lot of women who like to be housewives, who want to be housewives. Yeah. Because I always advocate for financial independence for women. But then I know I've seen a lot of girls who are like, I don't want to work. I just want to, be a housewife. In those scenarios, of course, I respect everyone. It's completely their choice. But then I get confused if financial independence is for everyone. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you can still invest,
have some source of income. Yeah.
Have something.
Exactly.
I'm sure a lot of those women are still educated.
Oh, yeah.
They have something to fall back on. A lot of women, are in those situations not always out of choice.
Yeah.
But, you put your kids first and that's your sacrifice.
True.
And that's absolutely fine. But there are ways that you can still be financially independent or strive towards that. It's like just completely relying on one person. That just doesn't work for me.
Exactly. Before we end, we're almost out of time, unfortunately. The time flew by.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk a little bit about being a mother and being a single mother and how that experience is like. Probably you hear a lot of comments from people, or you hear a lot of support, maybe both. How has that experience been like?
So like I mentioned before about I had my own kind of reservations and my own inhibitions about how that might be. And it wasn't easy at the beginning because, I felt like I had a point to prove that I can do this on my own. Like I don't need anybody. And so you run yourself to the ground trying to, but then who are you proving it to, right? Like if I'm a good mother or if I'm not a good mother, who's out there? Like, who are you to judge me on that, right? Everyone always says that, mashallah, like my son Aman, like he's a great kid and everything. And I'm like, yeah, but do I really care about your opinion? Like, if he's a great kid, like, that's great. That's going to be great for him. But my thing is like nobody was there for me in my hardship, right? Nobody called me or was like, do you need anything? I know you've just gone through this divorce and but everyone has like a comment to make or an opinion on it.
Yeah.
And so I got to that point where I was just like, okay, I need to now just have boundaries. If you're not paying my bills, and, if you're not there in my hardship or if you're not there to wipe my tears when I'm sad, then do you really matter? Do I really care about what you think? And that was, and when I got divorced, I became less emotional. So as time went on, I just became less emotional, more practical, and learned to just shut people out, which isn't the absolute norm. But it's what worked for me because it's a hard world out there. Our people are like hard, They like say some like tough things. Oh, you should have just stayed, bichara bacha. He doesn't have, living with his dad now. Like, no, there's no bichara about him, actually. He's far from bichara. He is now living in a happy, in a thriving, in a stress-free environment. And I would say this, and I say this to everybody that's, unhappy in their marriages. Like when you stay there for the sake, and our culture is very much like for the kids, right? Like everything's for the kids. But actually, that's a lot more detrimental to their lives being in unhappy environments. Kids see everything. Kids pick up on everything. When I got divorced, like we didn't tell my son at the beginning and stuff. And when he finally found out, he said to me, "Is that why you stopped wearing your ring?" And I was like, wow. Like he noticed something so small. So kids do. And at the beginning, even Aman was like, but I don't want you to get divorced. And, I don't care if you argue and it's fine. But in the long run, that's not a healthy environment. Yeah. And so for our South Asians, I think we need to get out of that mindset about what will people say and what about the kids and this thing that, a 2.4 family is the best version of a family. No, that's not the case.
Wow.
A happy family is the best version of a family. So I think, my ending note would be people need to kind of invest more in themselves, bring about a bit more self-awareness, and concentrate less on, what other people are wearing and doing and going and saying and feeling. It's not all about them.
That takes a lot of time to build that, I think.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time, a lot of experiences, a lot of resilience, and a lot of self-awareness. I think that's the biggest thing I have learned in my life is to be self-aware.
True.
And to understand why I behave the way that I behave, what values I'm instilling in my son. Like, you know, I love my culture. Oh my God. I love not every aspect of it, but most aspects. I love the community building. I love, you know, that I don't have to call my mum just once a week, you know, like it's a chore, that, you know, it's okay for my mum to call me 10 times a day and complain about the same thing. You know, are you even Desi if you don't hear from your mum 10 times a day, right?
So true.
And I've learned so much from other cultures, and I can appreciate mine. But there are also things about our culture that need to change. Our mindset just needs to change now.
I love that. It's so cool. It's so inspiring to see like even when I read your story, when I heard your episodes, everything, I just felt really empowered and inspired, and I was really excited to meet you.
Oh, me too. I love what you're doing, and it's so like great to have these conversations and have platforms for these conversations, and to actually, the other thing about the South Asians, to uplift each other.
Exactly.
Right? And not everything is a competition.
Yes.
That, you know, you and I can both have separate podcasts and, you know, talk about similar things and still bring it together, because it's education. The more people that hear it, the more people it might resonate with. And, you know, if it impacts even one person, then that's a job well done. And I think you're doing that. You're doing a great job of impacting people. So kudos to you too.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was so nice. I loved this conversation. I'm so sad because we didn't get too deep into.
I know, but now you're gonna have to come on What's Brown Got to Do with it, so we can continue.
We can do a part 2 as well of this episode. Hopefully, I have a little gift that I give in the end. Actually, we always end with a little cheers. Yeah,
I was gonna say.
Yeah, so we could do the cheers. Yay! You can drink your water.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. She does not like Karak, unfortunately, so she has water in her cup.
It's the non-Desi in me.
I thought you loved your culture.
Apart from the Karak.
Okay, so I hope you like tea, though.
I love tea.
Okay, thank goodness.
This is the British in me, okay? I'm all about the tea.
Okay.
Oh my God, this is so beautiful.
So this is a little tea box that has a lot of different flavor. You can open it if you like.
It's so cute.
Yeah, and there's like a little filter for you to make the tea. And
oh, look at this.
And all the flavors are
Wise
on the back.
words.
Yes.
Cup of tea is peace. This is coming from a Brit. A cup of tea is definitely peace. I love it. Thank you so much.
Of course. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you send me pictures and videos of when you make the tea.
Oh my God, I will. I will enjoy this for sure.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to introduce my partnership with Feel Good Tea. They're this amazing company that sells these beautiful tea boxes with a variety of tea flavors, which I'll showcase to you by opening this beautiful box. So as you can see, there's all these variety of flavors that are delicious, and Feel Good Tea, they truly value the love for tea that we, Karak with Mehreen, value as well. They love having conversations over tea. So because of this, I'm so excited for this partnership, and you can get this beautiful box too for yourself or for your family or friends using this discount code on the screen.